From Judaism, Kabbalah, and the Temple of Man. I dedicate this lecture to beloved El Moria, to our father Abraham, and to the I Am presence of each one. In the beginning, there was nothing. And then 15, maybe 20 billion years ago, there was an explosion so monumental that compared to it, today's atom bomb seems insignificant. It was the beginning of time, the beginning of space. It was, according to the Big Bang Theory, the beginning of the universe. That's how Nightline reporter Michael Gillen described cosmologists' explanation of how the universe began. Cosmologists say that in the beginning, there was a single point. Gillen explains. At first, the universe was an impossibly small speck of energy with no width, depth, or length. And it wasn't surrounded by space. It was surrounded by nothingness. In other words, at that instant, that speck contained the whole of space, of time, matter, and energy. Nothing else existed, only that speck. Within a fraction of a second, that speck of energy expanded at the speed of light, maybe even faster, a bubble of space and time that grew and grew without bounds. This bubble was filled with a blazing inferno of matter and energy, which eventually cooled, coalesced, and formed planets, stars, galaxies. The Big Bang Theory is the creation myth of cosmologists. It is based on scientific evidence that shows that the galaxies are moving away from each other. Scientists were all but certain that the Big Bang Theory is correct, but they couldn't prove it until NASA launched into space the Cosmic Background Explorer satellite, COBE, to look at clouds of microwave radiation that are almost as old as time itself. The satellite enabled scientists to see how the universe was evolving when it was only 300,000 years old. COBE enabled scientists to verify the Big Bang Theory. When the findings were announced on April 23, 1992, excitement in the scientific community could hardly have been higher. It was at least duplicated at the Royal Teton Ranch. George Smoot, head of the research team that made the discovery, said that looking at radiation patterns just after the Big Bang is like looking at God. Celebrated physicist Stephen Hawking called it the discovery of the century, if not of all time. This is NASA footage showing the Big Bang. Where were you in the beginning? Why, of course, you were in the beginning with the Word, with Brahman. Confirmation of the Big Bang Theory is a great breakthrough for science, but not for religion. What scientists have done is to confirm the creation myths of Hindu and Jewish mystics of ages past. Like today's cosmologists, Jewish mystics of the 13th century describe creation from a time when there was nothing. God, as revealed in the Bible, was not yet even manifest. The term they used to describe God prior to creation was Ein Sof. Write it down. It is spelled in two words, E-I-N, then S-O-F. Ein Sof. This means without end. Ein Sof is usually translated as the infinite. Ein Sof is the ultimate reality, unmanifest, incomprehensible, imperceptible, and indescribable. It is the divine nothingness. Ein Sof is the first cause. The writings of Jewish mystics describe how the infinite created the universe from nothing, starting with a single point of light. All creation emanated or exploded from that point. Sefer HaZohar, the Book of Splendor, even describes the creative process within Ein Sof prior to the manifestation of the single point of light. Quote, "As the will of the king began to come forth, he engraved signs in the uppermost pure light. Within the most hidden recesses, a flame of darkness issued from the mysterious Ein Sof. A mist with formlessness ringed about, neither white nor black nor red nor green, of no color at all. Only when measured did it bring forth light-giving colors. From deep within the flame there flowed a spring, out of which the colors were drawn below. Hidden in the mysterious concealment of Ein Sof. It broke through and yet did not break through the ether surrounding it. It was not knowable at all until by force of its breaking through, one hidden sublime point gave forth light. Beyond that point, nothing is known. Therefore it is called beginning, the first utterance of the all." That is the end of the quote. When I read these words, I was thrilled to the very depths of my being to realize how many thousands or even millions of years ago this conception of the birth of creation was known, perhaps on distant worlds, and how this very spring, the confirmation of that very written chronicle was made by scientists. The Zohar was written in the 13th century, but Jewish mystics insisted that their doctrines had been transmitted orally for millennia. I believe they have been transmitted to this earth from other planets and systems of worlds. In the 16th century, the great mystic Rabbi Isaac Luria made a radical change in the esoteric Jewish cosmology. Luria's concept of creation began with what he called Tzim-Tzum, spelled T-S-I-M, T-S-U-M, Tzim-Tzum, or contraction. Luria said that prior to creation, the universe was filled with Or Ein Sof, the infinite light. When Ein Sof desired to create, he contracted the infinite light to a single point. This contraction created primordial space, which David Ariel, president of the Cleveland College of Jewish Studies, calls the hypersphere. The hypersphere. There was nothing in the hypersphere besides that point. What follows was Luria's Big Bang. After the contraction of the limitless light to a single point, Ein Sof issued forth a ray of light. The hypersphere refracted the ray of light into a sphere, and then into a series of concentric spheres which expanded rapidly. From this came the whole of creation, not just a physical universe, but all planes of existence. There are many Hindu concepts of creation. The oldest is found in the Rig Veda. It is called the creation hymn, and like the cosmologies of the scientists and the Jewish mystics, it begins at a time when there was nothing. Quote, "Then was not the non-existent nor the existent. There was no realm of air, no sky beyond it. Death was not then, nor was there aught immortal. No sign was there, the days and nights divider. That one thing, breathless, breathed by its own nature. Apart from it was nothing whatsoever. Darkness there was, at first concealed in darkness. This all was indiscriminated chaos. All that existed then was void and formless. By the great power of warmth was born that unit. Thereafter rose desire in the beginning, desire the primal seed and germ of spirit." End of quote from the Rig Veda. And so we read in Genesis, "In the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth earth was without form and void, and darkness was upon the face of the deep, and the Spirit of God moved upon the face of the waters. And God said, 'Let there be light.' And there was light. And God saw the light, that it was good. And God divided the light from the darkness. And the evening and the morning were the first day." Within the last few decades, scientists concluded that the universe is about 15 billion years old. About 700 years ago, Rabbi Isaac of Akko, a mystic, reached the same conclusion. He did not base his calculations on precise scientific measurement. In his book, The Treasury of Life, he said he based it on the hidden oral tradition. Where does an oral tradition come from that accurately calculates the age of the universe, verifiable by science at 15 billion years? It comes from the ancient of days. It comes from scientists from beyond this world. Jewish mysticism may seem like a contradiction in terms. The mystics seek the direct experience of and union with God. David Ariel, an authority on Jewish mysticism, points out that Rabbinic Judaism is anti-mystical, or at least it attempts to neutralize the mystical impulse inherent in all religions. Of course, we find that there is a certain level of leadership in all religions who are anti-mysticism. This is not unique to Judaism. But this was not always the case in Judaism. The rabbis at the time of the early rabbinic period, 70 AD to 200 AD, were well aware that in times past, men had had direct, intimate contact with God. At the time of Adam, man communicated directly and easily with God. Abraham, Moses, and the prophets also had an intimate relationship with God. But the rabbis noted that God had gradually withdrawn from direct communication with man. Why? The rabbis believed that about the time of the return from the Babylonian exile in the 5th century BC, direct communication between God and man had come to an end. By the 1st century, they believed a great chasm had opened between God and man. At that point, writes Ariel, the Jewish people had no expectations of having a direct, unmediated relationship with God. End of quote. Judaism became a legalistic religion which substituted the observance of the law, ritual, and morality for direct mystical experience. Rabbinic Judaism, which developed into modern Judaism, has been suspicious or even hostile to mysticism ever since. According to Rabbi Devorah Jacobson, quote, the rabbinic tradition was always superstitious and fearful of any mystical movement that arose in Judaism. From very early on, the rabbis went to extremes to put hedges and fences around mystical practice and belief. End of quote. The mystic posed a threat to the system of rabbinic law, and thus to the power and authority of the rabbis who had created the system. During the early rabbinic period, the rabbis recognized that a rare individual could communicate directly with God. They believed in miracles and even recorded a number of cases where people had had prophetic experiences. But they did not want mysticism to play any role in matters of religious law. Writes Ariel, they rejected the legal admissibility of the individual religious experience, direct contact with God. They even rejected prophecy in favor of the indirect relationship with God that is possible through the fulfillment of the Torah. Thus we see that those who have desired to pursue the path of the Kabbalah and Jewish mysticism have been up against the entrenched hierarchy of Judaism, just as light bearers in every one of the world's religions have come up against the same entrenched hierarchy when it comes down to personal communion directly with God without the intercession of priest or rabbi or church or minister, etc. This is where there is the dividing of the way for all of us. The literal translation of the word Torah is teaching, but it refers to Jewish law. In the narrow sense, Torah refers to the written law, the Pentateuch, or 5 books of Moses. In the broader sense, Torah encompasses all the teachings of Judaism, its laws, doctrines, ethics, philosophy, customs, and ceremonies. This includes the oral law, the Talmud, which is the vast body of rabbinic writings on civil and religious law, and other rabbinic teachings. For the Christian, the heart and soul of Judaism is in the prophets and the patriarchs. In the prophets we find the true mystics, and in them and in their path we find a kinship and a similar union with God. The rabbis did more than reject the mystical experiences of man. They also rejected the ongoing counsel of God. Ariel points out that the meaning of one Talmudic legend is that, quote, disagreements among rabbinic scholars about points of law are no business of God's. That's putting it bluntly, and that's drawing a line. The earliest records of Jews having mystical experiences date from the 2nd century, the very period when most rabbis were organizing against mysticism, and when the early Christian church was organizing against the Gnostics. Mystics practiced what is called Merkava, or chariot mysticism, a term that comes from Ezekiel's vision of the chariot of God. The prophet Ezekiel is the prototype of the Jewish mystic. Ezekiel 1:4 and 5 records that a whirlwind came out of the north, a great cloud, and a fire enfolding itself, and a brightness was about it. And out of the midst of the fire, as the color of amber, came the likeness of 4 living creatures, which had the likeness of a man. Within the cloud he saw the chariot of God, a glowing object with huge wheels that appeared to be made of topaz, surrounded by 4 four-winged creatures. Above the creatures was a vault of the heavens that gleamed like crystal. Ezekiel 1:26-28 records, and above the vault of the heavens that was over their heads was the likeness of a throne that had the appearance of a sapphire stone, and upon the throne there appeared the likeness of a man. And I saw as the color of amber, as the appearance of fire round about within it, from the appearance of the man's loins even upward, and from the appearance of his loins even downward, I saw as it were the appearance of fire, and it had brightness round about. Imagine you as Ezekiel feeling the tremendous presence of all 7 levels of the heavens, and being in that state of having God open himself to you. As the appearance of the rainbow that is in the cloud in the day of rain, so was the appearance of the brightness round about. This was the appearance of the likeness of the glory of the Lord. Yud, Hey, Vav, Hey. Blessed be the God of Israel. For centuries, Jewish mystics have tried to reproduce Ezekiel's experience. Gershom Scholem, born 1897, died 1982, was the contemporary authority on Jewish mysticism. He wrote for us, "The Merkava mystics occupy themselves with all the details of the upper world, which extends throughout the 7 palaces in the heaven of Aravot, the uppermost of the 7 heavens, with the angelic hosts which fill the palaces, with the rivers of fire which flow down in front of the chariot, and with the bridges which cross them. But the main purpose of the ascent is to have the vision of the one who sits on the throne, a likeness as the appearance of a man, upon it, above it." The vision of Ezekiel brings to mind the vision of the I am that I am, the Son of God, and the individual who ascends the planes of being to attain to those levels. Some Merkava mystics had an out-of-the-body experience as they attempted to replicate the vision and the experience of Ezekiel. Others had the sensation of their whole being going on a journey. Rabbi Akiva, a 2nd century mystic, visualized himself rising through the 7 palaces and 7 thrones until he found himself standing before the throne of God. Hai Gaon, an 11th century mystic, said the experience was an inner journey to the innermost recesses of the heart. Some mystics wrote poems called Merkava hymns, in which they attempted to express the inexpressible experience of seeing God. O wreathed in splendor, crowned with crowns, O chorister of him on high, extol the Lord enthroned in flames, for in the presence of the presence, in the inmost glory of the inmost chambers, you set up your posts. Your names he distinguished from his servant's name. The flame surrounds a leaping fire, around him burning, glowing coals. This is the experience of a Jewish mystic, someone like you, someone like me. The rabbis opposed the practice of Merkava mysticism on the grounds that it was dangerous. Jewish law contained warnings against trying to replicate Ezekiel's experience. The public reading of Ezekiel's vision was banned except on the festival of Shavuot. In fact, Sholem wrote, the rabbis sought to conceal the book of Ezekiel by withdrawing it from general circulation or from the biblical canon. Nevertheless, Jewish mystics practiced Merkava mysticism, usually in secret, for about 1,000 years. Why did the rabbis fear? They feared because the individual would make direct contact with the living God without them. It is the fear of every hierarchy of every world religion. Those hierarchies fear you and me because we dare to come apart and have that direct experience without them. But we invite them all to come into our tent, come into the tabernacle of the Lord and rejoice with us and contact your own living God. The concept and the reality of the mystical journey to the innermost recesses of the heart, as Hai Gaon described his experience, is the treasure in common of every mystic, of every world religion who has ever sought the God within. Step by step, we trace the footprints of the great mystics of all time. As we do this, you may very well come to the moment right here in the heart of the inner retreat of spiritual ecstasy they achieved when they arrived at the innermost recesses of the heart. It can be said that all paths of the world's religions lead to the heart, and this is the wondrous story I shall unfold for you here at Freedom 1992, aptly called Joy in the Heart. I joyously bow to the light within your heart. Starting in the 12th century, Jewish mysticism was called Kabbalah, or tradition. The literal translation of Kabbalah is receiving. Kabbalah means receiving. But as David Ariel explains, the name Kabbalah derives from the word kibel, which was used to explain the chain of transmission of the oral Torah. Kabbalah therefore means tradition, in the sense that it claims to be another stage in the unbroken transmission of the oral Torah going back to Sinai when Moses talked with God face to face and received the 10 Commandments. When Moses walked and talked with God throughout the 40 years in the Sinai desert. Between the 12th and 14th centuries, Kabbalists used a variety of names. The Kabbalists of Spain and Provence called Kabbalah inner wisdom, and Kabbalists the understanding ones. Others called Kabbalists the masters of knowledge, those who know grace, and masters of service, meaning those who know the true inner way to the service of God. According to that definition, you are all Kabbalists. I so dub you this day. What is the origin of the Kabbalah? According to Gershom Scholem, that is indisputably one of the most difficult questions in the history of the Jewish religion. In the 13th and 14th centuries, Jewish mystics asserted that the Kabbalah went all the way back to Adam. I am certain that it did. That's the position taken by most Kabbalists today. Scholem explained, many Kabbalists denied the existence of any kind of historical development in the Kabbalah. They saw it as a kind of primordial revelation that was accorded to Adam or the early generations and endured. Although new revelations were made from time to time, particularly when the tradition had been either forgotten or interrupted. In the 13th century, it became widely accepted that the Kabbalah was the esoteric part of the oral law given to Moses at Sinai. Scholars have rejected this point of view and offered two theories of their own. One holds that Kabbalah is a new creation of the 12th century that emerged in reaction to the rationalism of Jewish philosophy. The other says that Kabbalah probably originated centuries earlier in the Greco-Roman world. It was passed on orally, but it did not surface in Jewish literature until the Middle Ages. It is not clear which school of thought is right. Even the early Kabbalists were ambiguous about the source of their tradition. According to Rabbi Arthur Green, president of the Reconstructionist Rabbinical College, the early Kabbalists in fact made a dual truth claim for their esoteric readings of Scripture and their boldly speculative ideas. They claimed both that they were ancient, the secret wisdom passed down by countless generations, only now given to public reading, and also that they were new, freshly revealed by the heavenly voices to the sages of immediately preceding generations. In any case, Kabbalah appeared around 1175 in Provence. According to David Ariel, covert suggestions about mystical revelations from the prophet Elijah began to appear in statements attributed to leading rabbinic figures of the period. Elijah was said to have given mystical revelation to various rabbis in the 12th and 13th centuries, including Isaac the Blind, the first identifiable Kabbalistic author. Kabbalah built on the Merkava and other forms of Jewish and non-Jewish mysticism. But it was not a mere continuation of a known form of Jewish mysticism. Kabbalists began to talk about the idea of reincarnation, an idea so shocking that they were afraid to discuss it publicly. But the acceptance of new ideas like reincarnation were not the essence of the radical change. Kabbalists adopted a new way of looking at God, creation, man, and the purpose of life. One of the most important Kabbalistic innovations was to give the Torah an esoteric interpretation. The Sefer HaBahir, or the Book of Clarity, written in the 12th century, is the earliest Kabbalistic text. According to Rabbi Arthur Green, the author of the Bahir, the Book of Clarity, and all Kabbalists after him claim that the true subject of Scripture is God Himself, and that revelation is essentially an act of self-disclosure by God. Because the majority of people would not be able to bear the great light that comes with knowing God. However, divinity is revealed in the Torah in hidden form. Scripture is strewn with hints as to the true nature of that which is above and the mysterious process within divinity that led to the creation of this world. Only in the exoteric public sense is revelation primarily a matter of divine will, teaching the commandments man is to follow in order to lead the good life. The inner esoteric revelation is rather one of divine truth, a network of secrets about the innermost workings of God's universe. In order to explain the inner workings of the universe, there emerged a new religious language complete with new symbols. These were necessary in order to convey the new understanding of God and the operation of the universe. The most important of these symbols are Ein Sof, God. God the unmanifest and the unknowable. The second of these is the Sefirot. Sefirot. It is a plural noun. The Sefirot are the 10 aspects of God's being that manifest from Ein Sof. So here you have Ein Sof, God, the unmanifest and the unknowable. And he reveals himself through these 10, whatever you want to call them. I will give you a number of names for them. 10 presences. So we go from 1 to 10. I'll be using the word Sefirot many times, and every time I use it, I'm referring to more than one of the Sefirah. Sefirah is the singular noun of Sefirot. The term Sefirot originally meant numbers or numerical potencies. It first appeared in Sefer Yetzirah, the Book of Formation. Sidney Spencer, author of Mysticism in World Religion, explains, the Zohar takes as its starting point the assumption common to all Kabbalists, that underlying all things is the creative power of, guess what? The creative power of speech. We would call it the science of the spoken word. Enter Abraham El Moria. The teachings of the Kabbalah and the Tree of Life and the Sefirot are the teachings of the science of the spoken word, and how in the pronouncement of these 10 words and other names of God, we can draw forth the specific light, manifestation, energy, and consciousness of that compartment of God when we use that word. The Kabbalah is an astounding science, and it is truly the mother of all sciences, along with the ancient Vedas of India. The central feature of the teaching of the Zohar is the conception of the Sefirot. In the Sefer Yetzirah, the Sefirot are living numbers, conceived as divine emanations. In the Zohar, they are commonly described as grades. I want you to make a list of all the names I'm giving you for the Sefirot, because a name is a key to an identity. When I know your name, I can make contact with you. When you know a name of God or a part of God, you can make contact with that part of God. So we've called them living numbers. We've called them numerical potencies. Living numbers. Now we're calling them grades. The next name to write down is degrees of creative power. Degrees of creative power or divine manifestation. They are at once qualities, that's another name for the Sefirot, qualities, attributes, agencies of God. They are the creative names which God gave to himself. Each part of himself having a specific name with a specific vibration that we could access through the universal computer of the mind of God. The world of the Sefirot is the hidden world of divine language which underlies the phenomenal universe. The Sefirot represent both the phases of the hidden life of the Godhead and the means of his self-revelation to man. The Sefirot are channels. Write down the word channels. Or emanations. Write down the word emanations of the divine light, whereby the transcendent God becomes immanent in the world and in man and woman. The Sefirot are active in the soul of man and womb man, itself an emanation from them. We are an emanation of the Sefirot. And so they enable man in his turn to play a creative part in the divine order and unite himself with them. Because we are created out of and we are an emanation of Ein Sof and the Sefirot, we are co-creators with God. We always knew we were co-creators, but now we find out why and how. The Sefirot emanate from Ein Sof. As I said, Ein Sof is the infinite. Kabbalists say that Ein Sof is beyond description or comprehension, simply because the finite mind cannot contain the infinite. We can only approximate or gain an equivalency of the divine mind. A 14th century Kabbalist text said, Ein Sof is not hinted at in the Torah, the prophets, the writings, or the words of our rabbis. May their memory be a blessing. But the masters of service, that is, the Kabbalists, have received a little hint of it. Even though Ein Sof is unknowable, Kabbalists had a lot to say about it. Kabbalists called Ein Sof the cause of all causes and the root of all roots. Doesn't that sound like the great Tao? Some conceived of Ein Sof as the primal will, or the will of all wills. Others said that Ein Sof was pure thought, or the thought which has no end or finality. Ein Sof is often thought of as nothing or nothingness, because it is not manifest in the manifest cosmos. So absolute is the nothingness that Ein Sof had to first create the God of Genesis before the creation could begin. I'm going to say that again so you can write it down. So absolute is the nothingness that Ein Sof, the unknowable, incomprehensible, had to first create the God of Genesis before the creation could begin. Where have you ever heard that concept? Moses Cordovero, one of the great Kabbalists of the 16th century, said that before Ein Sof emanated the Sefirot, he knew them as inner lights. That's another name for the 10 Sefirot, inner lights. You know what you can do with all these names for the Sefirot? You can put them all together and make an invocation to call them forth by all those names I've given you. Now it gives me great pleasure to introduce to you Rabbi Moses de Leon. He was born about 1240 in Leon, Spain, and he died in 1305. Rabbi Moses de Leon is the mystic genius who authored the Zohar, known as the Book of Splendor. He was and is the servant of the Blessed Holy One. Rabbi Moses de Leon, wherever you are, we bow to the light within your heart. Let's give Rabbi Moses a hand. The Zohar is an encyclopedia of Kabbalistic thought. Rabbi Arthur Green explains, the Zohar must be viewed as a great compendium of all the Kabbalistic thought that had come before it, reworked and integrated into the author's own all-embracing poetic imagination. Ideas contained in bare hints or clumsy expressions in the generations before him now spring forth full-blown, as it were, as a part of the ancient wisdom. a pseudepigraphical work. The Zohar is attributed to Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai, a 2nd century mystic. Many traditional Kabbalists think the Zohar is indeed a 2nd century work. But through painstaking literary investigation, Gershom Scholem demonstrated that the Zohar was indeed written by Moses de Leon. While scholars are virtually certain that de Leon wrote the Zohar, many of them have wondered whether he had help from higher sources. Rabbi Arthur Green says, one could reasonably believe the author had felt himself possessed by a spirit other than his own as he was writing it. Could de Leon have felt that Rabbi Shimon was speaking through him, that he was the mere vessel the ancient sage had chosen for the revelation of his secrets? Green also wonders whether de Leon saw himself as the reincarnation of Rabbi Shimon. Daniel Matt says, parts of the Zohar may have been written by automatic writing. He also says certain passages in the Zohar are anonymous and appear as utterances of a heavenly voice. From about 1500 to 1800, the Zohar had canonical or near canonical status. According to Charles Ponce, author of the book called Kabbalah, for many centuries it ranked beside the Talmud and the Bible in importance. Today, scholars agree that Moses de Leon was one of the most important figures in the development of the Kabbalah. Therefore, it gives me great joy to introduce the second mystic genius of the Kabbalah, Rabbi Isaac Luria. Isaac Luria. Rabbi Luria was a true servant of the Blessed Holy One even before he was born in Jerusalem in 1534. Rabbi Luria was known as the Ari, an acronym which stands for the divine Rabbi Isaac. Rabbi Isaac, wherever you are, we bow to the light of Tiferet within you. There are many legends about Rabbi Isaac, the Ari. According to Pearl Epstein, before the Ari's birth, his father was visited by the prophet Elijah, who announced, "Through him shall be revealed the teachings of the Kabbalah to the world." He was quickly recognized as a prodigy in the study of the Talmud. Luria was 8 when his father died and his family moved to Cairo. When he was a young man, he obtained a copy of the Zohar and began a multi-year study of the book. When he was not as successful in comprehending its contents as he had originally hoped, Luria set himself on an ascetic course prescribed for him by what he called a heavenly impetus. Retreating in solitude to a small cottage on the banks of the Nile, he spent 5 days alone in constant study and meditation, returning to his family in the city for the Sabbath. Prayer, fasting, and the Zohar remained his only companions for 2 years, at the end of which the prophet Elijah appeared in a vision to initiate him personally. According to legend, Elijah commanded Luria to go to the land of Israel. He arrived in the city of Tzfat. You might as well write this down. It is spelled S-A-F-E-D, but it's pronounced Tzfat. He arrived in the city of Tzfat in 1570. At that time, Tzfat was the home of a thriving spiritual community. According to Pearl Epstein, Tzfat is a natural mystic's retreat, an ethereal town that could just as well have been a tiny Tibetan enclave or the setting for an isolated monastery in the Himalayan foothills, a Jewish Shangri-La. The leading Kabbalists of the time were living in Tzfat. They quickly recognized Rabbi Luria as their teacher. He taught orally in Tzfat for just 22 months and then died suddenly in 1572 at the age of 38. But the writings of his disciples, which summarize his work, cover thousands of pages. Rabbi Luria taught his disciples to cultivate joy and avoid anger. Lawrence Fine, a professor of religious studies, said that according to Rabbi Luria, the joy of performing God's will ought to be regarded as greater than all material wealth. Rabbi Luria was particularly concerned about avoiding the sin of anger. He said that while other sins harm the limbs of the soul, the sin of anger harms the entire soul. Anger also causes the highest level of the soul to leave a person, and that when angry, a person is filled with a strange God. The years of my life have been rich in receiving much instruction from El Morya, as I have been an observer of life and people. I have seen before my very eyes people go into a rage, and in a single rage, literally extinguish the divine spark. That is how grave is the potential for anger in anyone. I have seen individuals go into a rage of anger and lose a portion of the soul, and by repetition over a lifetime, lose their entire soul. Anger is the absolute perversion of the Godhead. Anger can be aggravated and increased by wrong diet, by eating too much meat, too much acidic foods, by a toxic liver. Whatever the cause, there is not an exception. Those who allow themselves to become enraged forfeit some portion of their God identity. I suggest that you modify your diets, consider the macrobiotic diet, and recognize that, above all things, you must be a vessel of divine love and never allow anger to become a vortex that overflows the citadel of your being.